Good morning. Welcome to the first ever spring webinar of the National Pharmaceutical Congress. I'm Mitch Shannon of Chronicle Companies in Toronto. Very pleased to be your host this morning. Thanks for joining us. We have a large group of delegates today from 7 provinces, 7 U.S. states and the District of Columbia, France, Morocco, and Lebanon. Hope you and yours are all managing to get through this challenge wherever you are. We welcome you all. We've got one very fine panel with us this morning, 5 thought leaders who will share some ideas concerning what the COVID disruption means for the life sciences business today and what it will mean going forward. John, can we get the agenda up? Yep, that's it. So on your screen is the agenda for the next hour. If you want your own personal copy or if you'd like to see our speaker bios, we're on the self-service model today, kind of a cafeteria style. Pick them up and download them from tiny.cc/NPC on LI. That's our LinkedIn group. You'll also find an executive summary of findings and some other handouts online. So again, that's tiny.cc/NPC on LI. Later in this morning's discussion, there'll be an opportunity for delegates to ask questions of our panel. You can do that by raising your hand. There's a control for doing that on the bottom of your screen. There's also a Q&A button as well. If you're directing a question to a particular panelist, just mention the panelist's name in your question. And if you're not used to Zoom, remember that you can adjust your display layout with just a few clicks. Typically, that's in the top right-hand part of your monitor. So, John, if we can get that delegate breakout document up. So if you're curious about who your fellow delegates are this morning, there's a breakdown of our audience. Nearly 2/3 of the group here today are joining us from the center of the universe, Ontario, Canada. Of the remaining third, half are in Quebec, and the other half are quite literally all over the map. Around 20% of us this morning are C-suite occupants. About 30% are managers. Largest category with us today are other life sci, which takes in a lot of ground, from legal affairs to government relations to medical affairs. There's more than 60 organizations represented here this morning, including the National Research Council of Canada and Innovative Medicines Canada. And I guess if we can get to that last slide. Yep, I think that's really cool. We've got something very close to gender parity this morning. I think from other industry meetings, that's unusual and a good thing. So if we can have our first poll up, there's going to be some delegate polls throughout the morning. We'll try one out now as our test. And there it is. So the question is, how many years have you worked in pharma, life sci, biotech devices, or as a supplier to the industry? Go ahead and vote now, please. 60, 70%. Still voting. You've got another 5 seconds before we cut you off. I think that'll do it, Kylie. And there's the results. So the majority are 20 years or more in this business. Wow. What's wrong with us, huh? Good chunk, 10 years or more. And good representation of people who are still somewhat new to the business, 5 years and less. That's where the ideas and the energy come from. So very good combination there. So now that we know a little bit about each other, I guess we don't need that screen now. Now that we know a bit about each other, I'll just briefly acknowledge our sponsors for this event. These are 3 longtime partners of the National Pharmaceutical Congress. Ashfield is a global leader in commercialization services for the healthcare industry with capabilities in commercial, patient solutions, and medical affairs. Visit ashfieldhealthcare.ca. Impres is recognized as Canada's next generation commercial partner, driving exceptional brand growth through a full spectrum of turnkey solutions. Find out more at imprespharma.ca. Peak Pharma Solutions is a full-service strategic contract sales organization that provides flexible solutions to healthcare companies in Canada at peakpharmasolutions.com. Thanks to all 3. Today's webinar is organized by Chronicle Companies at www.chronicle.org and pharmacongress.info. With that said, I'll introduce our lead panelist, and to give him full credit and blame for the concept of this webinar idea. It all comes from our friend Peter Brenders of Kontollo Health. Mr. Brenders, over to you.
Thanks, Mitch. So thank you to Mitch, the Chronicle group of companies, and our sponsors, and for our distinguished panel today, too. I'm really looking forward to some insights. Mitch asked me to sort of talk about the learning objectives for the session. It's like I had to come up with something. And so I think if I could say one learning objective for the webinar is to help us as the senior managers out there, as we certainly saw from the poll, is to get us thinking a little more broadly on what we may need to consider for now and as we plan for the future. And then I reference back to a quote from Louis Pasteur, basically that fortune favors the prepared mind. So let's get started. It's late May already, which means many of our senior leaders on this panel have probably gone through a long-range planning process, thinking about the next 3 to 5 years, may even be starting to get ready for their budget 2021, which is kind of crazy in some respect when we're thinking about we're trying to guess based on some short-term trends and some anecdotal information. I think a seasoned approach that I've used with my companies in the past and with my clients more recently is to employ some type of scenario planning, an exercise that you go through. And so I'm going to engage our participants to help me with this exercise, and we're going to put up a little poll. If we can get the first question up, Kylie. So what do you think the typical physician healthcare practitioner engagement is going to be like, say, in October this year? Will those in-person sales and medical liaison visits, interactions return to normal? Will we see in-person sales and interactions not return, simply don't come back? Or maybe somewhere in between. Some docs are opening up the way it was, but more like, no, we're not interested. Please pick your choice there and submit. We'll give it a few seconds. A little music in the interlude. And then we'll see. Maybe, Kylie, if we can get the results put up. All right, so 88% looks like it's going to be somewhere in between. It's interesting that 4% don't see us going back to what was. And it's interesting is to do something like this, it's a bit of a guess in terms of how do we make our management decisions on that? How do we feel? So typically before jumping to an answer, we'd look at some critical uncertainties. It's what you do in scenario planning. From our poll, the question I sort of set up, there's a number of uncertainties that are implied or obvious in there. And so the first one I look at is what's our assumption on when a vaccine or sufficient immunity may exist for us to return to normality for business? You can take that poll down. Is it going to be 6 months, like we're thinking October? Is it 12 months? Is it 24 months? We have to make an assumption on that to guess that one. The other question is how are healthcare practitioners and their facilities, are they going to allow in-person visits again? Under when and what conditions? We saw recently just this week that the re-entry guidance of the American Hospital Association and AvaMed came out with respect to medical device reps and their access to healthcare facilities. I'm sure more are going to follow, and we may see some from pharma and the various other groups. The other question we have is we're working now remotely and sales interactions, so how effective are they? We're early in our data. Are these sales and interactions effective? Do we need to implement efficiencies? Are we planning for efficiencies for adequate and competitive profitability? And then our poll also had an assumption in there is that all geographic areas, as well as medical and therapeutic areas, are going to be the same. GP versus specialty, medical device versus drugs, oncology versus dermatology. We've always had some differences, and I can recall my business units always strongly defending their uniqueness. But will these really be more pronounced in the future? And will all the same rules apply to all? So as I said, in typical scenario planning, what I've gone through is typical critical uncertainties. You pick 2 of them, do a 2x2 matrix, and try to figure out 4 possible futures and then plan for that. Say healthcare practitioner openness, turns to normal versus limited access, and time to system stability, 6 months versus 24 months. So you can imagine in a 2x2 square, a business where you think it's going to be normal in 6 months is going to be very different in your business plan, where it's going to be limited in 24 months. What are you going to do for the next 2 years? And then the other question that we all have to think about is, what's the competition doing? I know we're all in this together, but I suspect many are still going to be competitors, and capitalism is going to rule the motivations. I mean, if we saw anything from Google this past week, they want everybody to try out Google Meet. Well, one encouraging aspect that I'm seeing in our futures that we may be looking forward to is whether this pandemic is going to kill the dinosaurs that we've been all trying to get rid of, and that's the bureaucracy choking our ability to respond. Think about all the processes we put in place to be slow and plodding. Do we really need it? Have we found that in the last 2 months that we can actually embrace simplicity? And will companies take action now for the long term? So those are my opening comments, but I'm really looking forward to hearing from our industry leaders in the various aspects of change and tools of the trade, field force, evolution, travel, meetings, marketing vendors, supply chain, healthcare practitioner engagement, and research. We've got a lot to touch on in the next 45 minutes. But before we jump to Wendy next, I'm just going to put one little thought in the minds, and hopefully we might have time to get to it at the end, as sort of a concept for the panel beyond business scenario planning. And that would be scenario planning for the individual. And I'm wondering how many of our staff are doing scenario planning for their career in all of this. If we have time at the end, I'd like to ask the panelists what role management we as senior leaders have to help our staff in such personal development planning. So with those thoughts, I'll throw it over to you, Wendy.
Okay, Peter. Well, thank you. Good learning objectives and items for reflection. And I do hope we get to your question before we terminate the session. Thanks, Mitch, and the panel for allowing me my 5 minutes. The question that I'm looking at is really, what does the future of the large scientific meetings look like, and will we see a return of crowds and conventions? So really, to kick that off, I have one poll question that I think sums up a lot of the direction for me. So if we could have that poll question.
Was I supposed to hum through this, Mitch?
Haha, yeah. Have you a little soft shoe, a little champagne music? I'm sure that's enough time if we can have the results of that. So, so I think that is really, in my mind, a bit the $1 million question regarding the large events as we've come to know them, or large events of any type, because really the participation at these large events are predicated on travel. And that can be either remote within country, but in our case, a lot of it has to do with global attendees. So getting a large event back up to scale like we've become accustomed to, in my mind, is really going to depend on travel for starters. It could even mean going by train or, aside from traveling on your own in your car, any other mode of transport. And then secondly, for these large scale events, I really feel they're reliant not just on the participants' willingness to show up, they're reliant heavily on whether or not the venue is going to be able to manage the safety, sanitation, and social distancing criteria that has been put in place. And likely we don't see that moving, away in the near term. So in the case of travel and the venue, the dilemma really right now revolves around these environments. They're enclosed. They do in some cases have poor circulation, but in this case, they all have high density of people. And so this spells trouble on both accounts. I was speaking to a professor at Humber College in the Department of Hospitality, Hotel and Restaurant Operations Management Planning. And she informed me that these large venues, be they hotels or convention centers, are currently not forecasting recovery for the next 12 to 18 months. So Peter, to what you were saying, looking at 2021 or even now look at 2022, how will that figure into your planning? That's some industry information that I was able to get. So in my mind right now, there is no future for the large-scale scientific meetings, not in the near term. However, over time, and I think with or without a vaccine, the population is going to become more accepting of travel. We're probably going to actually tire of not traveling, and then we'll ideally we'll ramp back up to the good old days that we've become accustomed to. And I can say that because we did so post 9/11, and we also did so post SARS, where there was really no vaccine for that outbreak. Now, at present, of course, we've all shifted our meetings to online, and it looks to me like everybody's engaging in webinars in some shape or fashion. And I do believe that these will continue into the future regardless. So to your point, Peter, I think there is some simplicity and ability to pivot that we've seen coming from the pandemic. But virtual conferencing, I think, is likely to forge a path forward. Live Zoom presentations like the one that we're conducting now will continue with, of course, the added benefit or ability to facilitate discussions and smaller group gatherings online to continue information sharing. On a positive note, of course, we've all seen the benefit to our budgets by doing online meetings and virtual communication. And I'd have to say, I'm sure the environmentalists out there are quite pleased with the results from this medium in our ability to suppress the carbon footprint. Now, what about big crowds and conventions? Like, will they return? Well, I guess I can't really imagine that the current digital medium is going to be able to replace the conventions that have been heavily reliant on booth activity. So this one, again, is tricky because it is still reliant on the guiding principles of safety, sanitation, and social distancing. These conventions have really relied on the success has really been on the proximity that's been established by the associates in able to conduct a face-to-face conversation. So how will you or how will we react moving forward to people wearing or not wearing masks? And what about if a person is coughing or sneezing beside you? I'm sure we've all actually encountered that already during the pandemic, and I'm quite sure we all have different views on how receptive or otherwise we were to that. And then, of course, at the conventions or any gathering, there's the speaker. And we know from coughing, sneezing, but also just from speaking, there's an exponential, propelling of air droplets by communicating. So can we run our conventions and meetings appropriately and with social distancing? I think maybe, there are options. They could be structured like we see at the grocery store at the moment, with directional arrows, no going backwards, and practicing social distancing in the best manner that we can. And for those of you who've been in grocery stores or Costco's or any type of retail outlet, you know that has its challenges as well. Or maybe the conventions will follow the wristband policy like people have seen when they're buying concert tickets. Or is it possible that there'll be a booth booking schedule with temperature checks at the door? Will we be wearing gloves and masks? Well, I guess all this is yet to be seen. Nonetheless, I do feel where there's a will, there's a way, and we are somewhat creatures of habit, and we're not an less inventive group. So I'm sure we're going to find a creative way to keep our meetings going. But I remain that large-scale events and convention centers will not have a place in the near term. I guess in closing, of course, the end game seems to be that a vaccine for COVID-19 would return us to normal. But I like what you said, Peter, with the ability to flex and simplify. I don't know that the past normal will be what will be the future normal. I actually don't know if people are actually looking forward to returning completely to the old ways of doing business. So thank you.
Wayne.
So welcome, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this. It's really great to be able to talk about our experience here in Newfoundland and Labrador. We did have some preparation when we had Snowmageddon back in January, and we were shut down for a couple of weeks. We had to readjust our approach to patient care. And back then, we spent a lot of time on the phone, but we weren't being reimbursed for it. The Newfoundland and Labrador government were out of the gates very quickly, and we got the okay on a Friday afternoon that we were able to bill virtually. And by Tuesday, my staff had me up and running. But for the past 6 weeks, I've been doing 40 virtual patients a day, seeing 1 to 2 patients in person, looking at lots of pictures and basically working flat out as nothing ever happened. Now, I know that's not happening in other jurisdictions, but we were able to get moving very quickly. But this has come at a price, and things are very different. So let's put up the poll question and see what the price we have paid. So when it comes to virtual care, how are the physicians finding it? Taxing and exhausting? Useful for diagnosing most condition, embraced by all patients, or all of the above or none of the above. So I won't tell you my answer, but I will answer the question and see what everybody else has to say. But it is very different. It's new. And having polled a number of physicians locally and across the country, the feedback has been interesting. As well, I've been on multiple webinars that have dealt with how to set up your practice, how to deal with the new reality. So I believe that we have a good smattering across the board here. I believe the true answer is taxing and exhausting. It's useful for many conditions, but not all. Our colleagues have told me that, at least in dermatology, it's absolutely useless for pigmented lesions. And again, listening to the cardiologist, they find it very difficult to listen to heart sounds with the phone pressed against the chest. So we certainly need to make some adjustments there. So as I see it, we are able to look after most of our patients. We're going to continue to have patient engagement via the internet, but there are going to be, at least for the short term, 20 or 30% of patients that need to have in-person assessments. When I look at my practice, I would think about 1/3 of it is skin cancer and related care. 1/3 of it is inflammatory disorders like acne, psoriasis, eczema, which is very easily done over the internet. And then about 1/3 is other things, some which can be done by virtual care, but others will have to come in. So right now we are managing very well. We're looking after most of our patients. We're waiting for the government to give us day 0 so we can start booking patients. I suspect when we open, we'll probably be seeing 10% of the patients in person and still 90% virtual. But as time goes over the next 6 to 12 months, that will probably go to 50-50, but it'll be, I would say, 18 months to 2 years before I see all my patients in person. Now, a lot of them have said, I'd rather talk to you over the phone and send you a few pictures. It's much more efficient. I spoke to someone who lives 3 hours away. They didn't have to get in their car. They didn't have to waste a day. They didn't have to pollute the environment. And so some patients will want to continue, and we hope that payers will allow us. It's a hell of a lot of work for our staff, and I have to thank my staff, because emailing prescriptions, faxing prescriptions, sending things out over the internet is much more difficult than seeing a patient in person, handing them some material. The other thing is we have a bin outside. People come and pick up samples or they pick up information, blue bag sealed with their name on it. So my office looks very different. It has one chair available to the patients to sit in, because one person comes at a time. So that's where we are, and I believe that we have a lot to learn, and things will not be looking back to normal for a long, long time. Peter, I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Wayne. You raised a lot of good questions, which I hope we'll get a chance to come to at the end. So let me jump over to Richard so we can stay on the agenda here.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Good morning. Great to see that there's so many participants on the line this morning. My intent is more for an invitation to reflect on 7 key marketing questions. Okay, so hopefully we'll achieve 2 things. Number 1, we might, avoid some blind spots that we're going through potentially through the crisis, and number 2, continue to help people to bring value to healthcare providers and ultimately Canadian patients. Okay, so I tend to look at the phase or the situation in 3 phases. There's the where are we coming from, or where are we going, and how to get there. So the first piece of the story in my mind is quite simple. Is the where are we? We are all going through the pandemic. It's a global crisis. The second phase is where are we going? So this part is a bit more complex, obviously. So if you look at the financial crisis that we went through in 2008, it's a publication from HBR proposing 3 types of recovery. The first one is called the V-shape, which is what we went through as a country in Canada. The V-shape, as you can see, is a bit of we go down, but we get back or bounce quite rapidly, and we go back to where it used to be pre-crisis. Okay, the U-shape, which is number 2. The U-shape is a bit closer to what the US went through. It's going down. There's a bit of a flat spot, and it's going back up, but not quite to the level we were pre-crisis. Okay, and the L-shape on the right, which is pretty much what Greece went through, is going down, and you see the L-shape where it takes years to go back to where we used to be. So all of this to say that I'm quite confident. I'm an optimist by nature, and I do believe that Canada will bounce back quicker and stronger than many countries around the world. So the economy will bounce back, but the marketing mix might not. So what I mean by this is that the formal marketing mix that we know, or the old normal, or we can call it our previous reality, I don't think that piece will come back. So there's 7 fundamental questions that I was reflecting on that I would share, and hopefully we'll bring some light into what the recovery could look like. So number 1, there's, I don't know if you're aware of the CASL regulation or the CASL, which is the anti-spam regulation. It's a federal agency. So I would say that number 1, I would make sure that all your team are on top and know what's happening there, because we all like to play. We all like to play to win, but we like to play the right way, obviously. So that's number 1. Number 2 that I was reflecting on, it is more from a segmentation perspective. So you've seen many segmentation in the past where we are mixing doctors' volume, we are mixing the adoption label, we are mixing the private coverage / public coverage patient load split. We have seen all potential mix of these potential criteria, and that is overlapped with all the product that you have in the same bag. So there's a lot of criteria for all of these segmentation, but one piece that we might want to keep in mind is, are we sure that all the doctors will have the same receptivity level to all the detailing or the virtual meeting? So do we capture their receptivity to virtual platform? And second, are we including this piece or this criteria in our potential upcoming segmentation? So that would be an interesting point to think about, because there's no point to go into offices or going after doctors that are not receptive, obviously. So that's number 2. Number 3, quickly, Dr. Wayne was referring to the potential sample distribution. So we all know that we're going to have much more telehealth or virtual meeting between doctors and patients. The question I would have for my team, at least internally, is how do we adapt? Can we ship the sample directly to patient? I don't know, but I'm sure that there's a way. We're exploring it at least. The second piece is we used to provide patient leaflet to doctors to give to patients, but can we maybe just share the file to doctors where the doctors will be able to share or send the email to their patients? So are we adapting the patient tools accordingly to reflect this new telehealth reality? So that's number 3, and I'm quite convinced we'll bring more value in that sphere quite rapidly. Number 4, try to go quick. Is it possible that this is the best time to collaborate between pharma companies? I've seen a lot of good examples lately, not just behind clinical trials, but there's much more collaboration in the industry, and maybe it's the best time to collaborate with academia or with university hospital and with government. Okay, so there's much more openness and receptivity at the government level, and is it the best time to do or structure some BD partnership? And I do believe that timing is quite obvious, and it's now. Okay, so that's number 4. Number 5, there's another implication that I was reflecting on regarding the copay programs. We all have brands where we do provide the copay. We just need to keep in mind that the landscape is changing rapidly, and that we might have lots of patients changing coverage type. And I would just raise the, is it sensitive, or do you have the sensitivity analysis if there's 10 patients or 10% more patients losing their coverage? What type of impact would you have on your P&L? So the copay will be changing potentially. And all of this to say that there's a risk on the obsolescence front that we tend to forget sometimes because of the long shelf life. But if the volumes are dropping within the next month or two, or the drop that we've seen in the last month or two, sometimes it's easy just to forget about the obsolescence cost or the risk of scrapping potential batches in a year or two from now that we need to approve as we speak. So that's just a blind spot that we might have to put on the radar. So number 6, when we're tracking the volume, I know all of you, or many of you at least, are tracking RX volume or tracking market share. I think there's an interesting shift happening, or there's an interesting dynamic going on right now where there is a shift in terms of script duration. So there's some pharmacists going from 1 month to 3 month script, so they're filling 3 months at a time, and some banners are encouraging it to limit the number of visits that the patients will have to make at the pharmacy. But in Quebec, or there's some places, in order to prevent a supply issue, there's also taking previous 3 month script and maxing it at 1 month length. So there's a major RX value or RX size dynamic behind the scene that we will not be picked up if you just look at number of scripts. So I would say just keep an eye to match value and volume, because if you just track volume, you might it might be misleading, and you might not play what's called for. So that's something that I'm challenging my team to keep an eye on. Number 7, quickly, as a final comments in terms of SWOT analysis, you all have seen many thousand SWOT in the past. I think the landscape outside is changing much these days, and in terms of threats and opportunities. Yes, of course, we need to relook at it, but there's also a tool called the TOWS, TOWS. I would challenge all the participants to Google it and take a look at this tool. It is a game changer for marketers, and it's at the best time, in my mind, to look at it, because the landscape is changing, and sometimes going from strat plan to another strat plan, the landscape is not changing, and we tend to look at it and move quite fast, but it is transforming as we speak, and the tools will be a good tools to bring your SWOT value to the next level. So on a final note, people are been asking me what do I think about the crisis in general, and even though it's extremely difficult for patients or from social perspective, as a marketer, and it's not like I want to see it as a positive thing, but I think it's a gift. It is a gift in a sense that it will be a trigger, or it's a catalyst to push us to do what we've been talking about for the last 10 years. And I do believe that the M3, or the marketing mix migration that we call internally the M3, will accelerate. And at the end of the day, I do believe that the necessity is a mother of innovation. And I think this catalyst will allow us to do what we should have been doing for a long time. And it will be pushing us, or be the catalyst, like I mentioned, to do or to transform from a marketing or a business model perspective in a much more efficient, and where we will bring more patients, or more value to patients, and ultimately to our partners or the doctors. So that's not to say that the COVID is a gift in general, obviously, but as a marketing or for marketing, I do believe that it will be transforming, and I think it's the catalyst that we've been waiting for. So on that note, Peter, back to you.
Thanks, Richard. brilliant thoughts on there, and I can't but help think about in terms of how companies respond and how the world of competition is going to separate the wheat from the chaff on that one. For some that can move, and then there'll be those that'll be slow to move, and it'll be interesting to see in 6 months' time who the new leaders might be in that space. So let's jump over to Robin and hear his thoughts on that one. Maybe Malinckrodt can give us that answer.
Thanks, Peter. I don't think I'll answer that first, but I'll try to create some thinking on some other areas. Quick housekeeping note. I'm going to have to ask Joe not to quit texting me in the middle of this conference. It's quite distracting, and I'm trying to maintain my focus on these Zoom webinars as much as possible. About a month and a bit ago, I was in line at one of our local establishments. It may or may not have sold wine. And as you're in the line, sitting on your taped 2 meter apart from the next person waiting to get inside, you get a bit of a speech from the security guard, tells you what's going to happen when you enter the store. You enter the store, you got your hands were hand sanitized for you by one of the staff. You were given a hand sanitizer to wipe down your cart or your basket if needed. And then you were to follow the arrows around this door in a one-way pattern until you got to checkout, waiting there until you were called up to the checkout. Now, what was interesting about that is not 4 weeks earlier, I was at one of our largest children's hospitals, and the only time I had any check-in with any staff was probably when I was paying for parking. And I think now that's one of the things that's likely going to change. So what I'd like to do is give everybody 3 points on vendor credentialing. It is something that exists in Canada right now, but you may or may not know about it. So I'll take you through what the situation in the U.S. looks like. From there, I'll take you to what the situation is in Canada today, and then I'll just give you quickly my thoughts on what I think it might look like in the future. So in the U.S., a vendor is anybody that works for a company that supplies into a hospital. It's not just a sales rep or a pharmaceutical rep. You could be in sanitation or food services. You're often in med tech. And they divide you generally into 3 categories. One is where you're in a patient care area, specifically helping with patients. That could be in the surgical suite in some cases. The second area is where you're training staff on the use of a product. Let's say a ventilator company is a good example. And then the third one would be anybody that's doing sales or relationship building in those hospitals. And if you go around a large U.S. hospital, the vendor credentialing for years was different from hospital to hospital. So the entrepreneurs have started their own vendor credentialing services where all these hospitals can sign up, and then they will do the vendor credentialing for you of all these different suppliers into the hospitals. And you'll often see a station where you have to go and check in. You'll definitely have to wear a name badge. And many of the criteria you can imagine, immunization, some background checks, definitely sponsorship, and you have to pay to get your credentials. And if you violate any of the rules or terms and conditions of that contract, you could be suspended from any access into that hospital. So that's what it looks like in the U.S. right now, and their med tech industry has already started reshaping what those vendor credentialing guidelines look like to allow the industry back into the hospital. Just a quick side note, our company supplies a drug and a device that is typically used on critically ill babies, newborn babies. But as it happens, in the last 2 months, it's being used in several ICUs across the country to treat ventilated COVID patients. So we were asked to come into some of the hospitals to help do some training or some maintenance on the device, and we had to make a difficult decision whether it made sense to obligate the terms of our contract or was there another way to service our customers. And we came to different decisions based on each situation. So now in Canada, med tech companies often do have to get vendor credentialings, but they're not that well enforced. But if you go to the med tech website, you'll see something that's called HSCN, Healthcare Supply Chain Network, and there's a vendor credentialing statement that we're all supposed to sign. And it's not that rigorous, and I think you can expect that it's likely going to change and get a lot more rigorous in the future. If you have a chance, go to UHN vendor credentialing and take a look at what is their rules right now. And UHN includes Princess Margaret Hospital, so clearly some immunocompromised patients. So they have 3 levels of vendor credentials. One is, like I said, if you're going to be in patient care areas, and you have to have a contract with that hospital. 2, if you're going to be training staff you have to have a contract with that hospital. And then the third one is, are you going to be selling or building relationships with that hospital? And there's a fee and there's an application process for that. And the fee is $1,000 a week. You do the math if you start to do that across cancer centers across the country. Now, I don't know of anybody who's currently paying that, and I don't think it's well enforced. But if we start to look at the future, I spoke to a lot of healthcare leaders at large hospitals across the country, and they've all said we will definitely be instituting stronger vendor credentialing measures. We want to know who's coming in and out of all of our hospitals, because we're all interacting with staff members or even just the public who are interacting with patients. And in this day and age, clearly that's going to change. So is it going to be just masks and hand washing? No, it's going to be more than that. Definitely badges, definitely applications, maybe some sort of fee, and perhaps measures taken against you if you don't follow these guidelines properly. So that's what med tech is like right now. Pharma, probably not as much. And what will that look like for maybe just more of a standard physician's office? I don't know, but I did want to give everyone a flavor for what it would look like in the hospitals and in the cancer centers, probably moving forward in the next few months in Canada. Peter?
Sorry, we had a lot of thanks, Robin. We had a lot of good points that were made in that, and we're opening up for some Q&A. There's a Q&A button at the bottom. You can type in your question, and Mitch and the team will pull those forward. But to get started, let me throw out a question just on the back of Robin's talk about credentialing, and maybe Wayne can jump in a bit as well. Robin, you talked about it from a healthcare facilities point of view, and you started to hint at it, what it could be from a individual physician, but then there's the middle ground in terms of large clinics and groups there. Maybe Robin and Wayne, you could jump in and answer on this one. Do you see sort of credentialing or such rules and guidances starting to become more widespread in the coming months?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Nobody's going to get into this office unless they've had a COVID screen, and once the vaccine comes out, we want to make sure they're vaccinated. We also want to know what their previous travel history is going to be. So there's going to be credentialing, and there's going to be a lot of questions asked because, the unknown, people traveling from another province. Have they been overseas? Have they been to an area that is still endemic with COVID? So, yeah, it's going to look very different. It won't be call, I happen to be in town, can I drop by for coffee? Those days are over. It's going to be, guidance. There's going to be questions. It's not going to be a free-for-all anymore.
Robin, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the day of the drop-in is over. Definitely clinics, doctors' offices, hospitals will all require appointments and some sort of verification, whether that's all credentialing, I don't know. I think we still have the opportunity outside of hospitals and offices for face-to-face meetings because that becomes more of an individual choice. And perhaps we might start to see more of those replacing in-clinic, in-office, in-hospital visits. But definitely a lot more rigor is going to be coming our way.
So that kind of segues into something that Richard was talking a little bit about too, in terms of compliance in some respect, in terms of safety and security. And Wendy made the same comments. How do you guys, and I'll open up to the panel broadly, how do you see sort of compliance being monitored and enforced, whether digitally or in person? Are things changing, or we're just all going to work continually well as we have in the past? Richard, maybe?
Yeah, the rules, it's a good question, Peter. I don't think it would be that different in a sense that it used to be followed already. It's just that the volume is increasing so much that the attention or the workload that will be generated for these compliance officers to keep an eye on all of these social media / virtual platforms is just that there's more volume to keep an eye on. So I think it'll be the same, but just heavier to manage.
Wendy, any thoughts to add?
Interesting. it's looking at, like I found actually on a positive side, running the webinars, if you can generate them out of your global business, you can get some quick wins, and it's managed a bit more centrally. So I find that's maybe a positive to help eliminate some of the work that Richard talks about. But on the other hand, I do see that it could be a never-ending vat of items to look at, et cetera. And that's where I feel on the compliance side, we've got to harness a bit the risk reward in some of what we oversee, and the true risk to the marketplace or to the physicians or to the patients, et cetera. It can go, it could go hog wild, and I don't think people have the resources to manage every nook and cranny that probably the legal beagles would like us to.
A couple of questions have jumped up in the Q&A for Dr. Gulliver. So let me see if I can pull it together. And they're basically around, do we see the drop-ins coming back after vaccinations, or even how are you acting today, Dr. Gulliver, with industry representatives? Are you doing video conferences, and how is that? Is that something that's sustainable?
Well, yeah, being the consumer of many of these products, I am doing video conferences both with reps and with the MSLs. There's also been lots of CME that has been industry sponsored that I've participated in. So I have a lot of experience. And in terms of the MSL, I believe that could be enhanced through the virtual platform. Because usually, an MSL comes in, you're kind of rushed. They have some data to show. You sort of get halfway through it. You might grab a bite of lunch. It's not very structured. I really like the virtual platform where you set a time. There's a presentation. There's data presented. You have time for discussion. And so, for me, I think you can enhance the MSL encounter via this platform. When it comes to the reps, again, the reps have a really different role. I've had a couple of Zoom encounters. It isn't quite the same, and so I believe that we're going to have to work on that to come up with something that's satisfactory for both the rep and for the physician. And so MSL, I believe it's having someone fly in and have a haphazard meeting, I don't really enjoy, but having a structured set time, set presentation, some data, and doing that 2 or 3 times a year will be much better for me. I'm still trying to figure out what's going to happen with the representatives.
And related to that, I guess the question is, you mentioned in your talk there that you've talked to your colleagues across the country. Are you seeing any regional differences, or is it just unique to each physician?
Yeah, there are regional differences, and it's really based upon what's happening with respect to the COVID pandemic. So in areas where we're seeing lower numbers of cases, like BC, they're sending their physicians back to work very soon. I suspect in Newfoundland and Labrador, we'll be coming back to work. I think today will be day 13 of no COVID for new cases for us. But in areas of high rates of COVID still, Quebec, Ontario, there's very little movement to open up physicians' offices. And in some places, the virtual medicine is still in its infancy. So it's basically all over the place, and it really is driven by how much COVID is in that particular area. And so you'll see both, on either end of the country, it's going to move quickly back to some inpatient, but mostly virtual. In other places, it may be still shut down for a few months, and there's definitely no reps getting in through the door while there's still a significant pandemic happening.
Which raises some questions in terms of how companies and managers manage many different regions, all being a little bit differently, and can you have one policy for all? So speaking of that, then let me throw a question open to the other panelists. Good question. Glenn blocked through and talked a little bit about sustaining company culture and motivating your team and your current employees from home. And I don't know if Richard, Wendy, Robin, you guys can jump in a little bit about what you think is working and what you might have tried that didn't work. Robin? Wendy?
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. I think going back to the what Dr. Gulliver said about managing telemedicine, I think most of us found the initial jumping into this virtual world was exhausting. I mean, everybody's been on how many Zoom, Skype, Microsoft Teams, Google, you name it. So there was keeping that visibility. And I feel that was a lot of people leading, trying to keep their culture somewhat visible that they're participating. It became exhausting. Then there's reaching out on the personal side, which was probably a little bit newer to a lot of leaders as opposed to just focusing on the business. So we did a lot of engagement that was not so business related. It was about the people and keeping them engaged and fun and games and recipe exchanges, et cetera. I'm sure every company did a million different options, and that was good. And now what I'm finding is, to try to rebound and go back to a little bit less meetings. It was great for engagement. I think we all ramped up our knowledge on all of our businesses pretty damn quickly. And then, these people were telling me they're working till 10 o'clock at night because they were not used to working from home. And by the time they looked up, it was quite late. So from a company culture perspective, that also wasn't what we were looking for. Not healthy. People still need to take breaks, and learning to work from home is likely going to be part of, in addition to people's culture as to how to manage that. And there's lots of write-ups, as everybody's read, on the benefits of working from home, but also how to manage it appropriately. So I guess it depends to some degree, coming back to what is your culture, and can you use this digital medium to help bolster it again? Can you find the positive? I agree with Richard, not to say that the pandemic is a gift, but it is the silver lining, is that there's a lot of great things that will come out of it that should have happened years ago. I think it'll give us a little bit more liberties overall, how we look at our business, and then how we engage with our team and how we grow the culture moving forward.
I think, sorry, Wayne.
I think one positive is that, which will be great for your industry, is that a lot of physicians who thought about retiring will not retire. After this, everybody wants to go back to work and stay working. So that's one positive I think will come out of this. I said I was going to retire in 5 years. Now I put it off for at least 10, maybe 15.
Yeah, I think thanks, Peter. The one thing I would agree with Wayne and Wendy for sure, but I think there's something to be said about efficiency as well from a meeting discipline. I do see that there's people more respectful on their airtime, not cutting each other, and when they speak, it looks like it's well thought of. It's clear. And there's less repetition, I would say. And I read an article lately on that potential efficiency gain, where an hour meeting can be solved within 30 minutes just by going offline. So I thought it was interesting.
Robin?
A little bit different for us, outwardly facing our customers. We've been busy with 2.5 time increase in our product. It's been all hands on deck. And we have a fairly liberal work remotely. I don't like to say work from home. Work from home as long as you're getting it done. So it's not been that big of a change for most of my team. Internally, changed quite a bit. And the one thing, not to repeat what anyone else said, but I missed the pop in to somebody's office just to ask a quick question that you can solve or get in 2 minutes. Now it seems to take a 30-minute Zoom or WebEx call to accomplish the same task. So like anything, a pendulum tends to swing a bit too far until it finds its rightful place. So I think it's going to start swinging back, and we'll find a way to work in this more virtual environment a bit better than I am right now, that's for sure.
Richard, I see you nodding on that one, finding the Zoom fatigue, or?
Yeah, no, we had the same stretch of baking your own bread at the beginning and exercise, and how to do yoga at home. And I think that we got the fatigue of the training and all of these non-business related quite quickly. So I think we're back on track. It's focused, it's efficient, it's exciting. I think we just gained our cruising altitude like pretty much every other panelist within 2-3 weeks, and it looks like there's I still see some great efficiency gain lately. So I'm positively impressed with the team, to be honest.
So, Wendy, do you want to add anything in on that?
No, I totally agree. I think there are a lot of efficiencies that come out of this. And then to echo what Robin said, right now it seems to be the feedback from the team is that they just miss those water cooler talks, right? They miss the 5 minutes at the coffee station, virtual lunches, they're fine, but it's still that, face-to-face encounter. It's still the proximity that, permeates in your office that helps build your culture. So despite the high achieve and efficiencies and budget management, a lot of the good that can come out of it from a business perspective, the human aspect is still a bit of a challenge.
So, do any of you guys, so the human connection is huge, and we've heard and read a lot about that, and everyone's hearing. So how are you planning for that? How do you bring it back? As we start to, BC's allowing larger groups now, different regions, you get behind 5 in Ontario by June. Are you, as managers, planning for that in the near future? Silence. Robin, jump in. Richard, okay.
Yeah, I mean, we do have, I don't want to get into specific, but we do have many product launches coming in, and the next 2 launches are planned virtually. So we just canceled the hotel. There's one in August, one in September. So at least in my experience, will be the first virtual launch ever done, at least internally. So we can get back to this later on, but it looks like the big meeting will be replaced by virtual. So we'll see how it goes. And it looks like a national sales meeting could be potentially our first virtual one. So it looks like we will be avoiding these meetings. And we'll take it from there. But I think there's also something to be said about traffic, and from a green mindset perspective, there's huge decrease in terms of pollution. So there's a lot less travel going on, and it looks like you see the water in Europe in Venice, and you see air pollution levels. So I like to believe that there's some positive at the end of the tunnel.
Okay, we're coming to the end, and I just want to selfishly jump back to my question about sort of managers and what role as senior managers we're playing in terms of helping our people. And so maybe if I can get each of the panelists to jump in with a minute, sort of what do you see as sort of that role to help our people plan their futures and anticipate? Surely they must have questions. Wendy, maybe you can kick us off on this.
Yeah, well, I think for most of us, the largest transition is at the sales force. What Wayne talked about, visits, et cetera, that, drop-ins only scheduled, virtual. How many can you do in a day? When do you see them, right? Maybe the doctors will treat patients through the day and the reps will see the doctors at night or it becomes a 24/7 business. So what I think is important is to a little bit talk, for sure, talking to our teams about how to sell virtually. I don't think there's anybody who's not looking at that as an option and how to give them the talents. A lot of information out there about what the future talent looks like, e-detailing, how good are you at managing the video or digital medium. So equipping them somewhat with that. Also, what we're finding is actually using it to our advantage. Again, if we have webinars, the follow-ups are available, and you can sell somewhat to 350 people all at once, so that's actually new to us with one message. And how do you springboard from that and make it relevant from a centric, global centricity in marketing, and then take that to your regions, because Newfoundland and Ontario and Quebec are all different. And how do you've got a sales force that's quite broad. And I guess the other question is what does your sales force look like moving forward, right? What does it look like? Is it a digital? Is it a hybrid? It's often tough to find people who are able to do both ways of selling. So I think these are things that we're looking at, and we're looking at what type of training we can bring based on, I think you said, how many scenarios do you look at? I mean, I find that exhausting as well. We could do 5,000 scenarios and still not get it right. So it's a little bit more reactive as to what we're seeing, and moving forward with the training, particularly for our sales team. That's where we're concentrating our efforts.
So unfortunately, we've run out of time, and we got a whack of questions that I didn't get to. So that was my failing as a moderator, I guess, for this event. So I want to thank the panelists, Robin, Richard, Wendy, and Dr. Gulliver, for taking the time to give us some really interesting insights. And having said that, let's turn it over to Mitch, who's looking really dapper in that jacket and tie.
Yeah, running counterintuitive again, I guess. Well, thanks to the panel. That was a fantastic discussion. I think it's part of a process. The conversation is going to continue. And with the indulgence of our audience here, I think we can run a minute or two overtime. I do have a question that seems kind of central to things. It comes from Rudy Fernandez, and Rudy's basically asking a question of pharma industry, one that our panel is able to respond to. The interest of the public and politicians and other stakeholders has obviously been focused by COVID. Rudy's asking, how best should our industry position ourselves now? And I think Pamela Freilich from Innovative Medicines Canada is still in the gallery. Kylie, if you can unmute Pamela, just in case she cares to respond to this. But does the panel have any thoughts on that for now?
Yes, I believe that what's happened has really elevated both physicians, pharmaceutical industry, anything around health. We were, down the list in terms of the most important things on the minds of Canadians. Now we're all top of mind. So if we can pull together and do this right, then I think we'll remain there for a long time to come.
Yeah, Pamela, I think your mic is on, Pamela, if you care to comment in.
Yeah, could you, with apologies, I was actually on another call and I'm monitoring with two different screens. If you could repeat the question, I'd be happy to offer thoughts quickly.
Yeah, it's from our delegate, Rudy Fernandez. He's basically asking, in light of the new attention and sense of hopefulness that stakeholders are applying to pharma these days, how best should the industry position ourselves now to perhaps be better thought of in the eyes of politicians and the public?
Yeah, thanks. I think this is it's a great observation. Our members are definitely seeing a change in the relationship. The governments have been reaching out to us in unprecedented ways. We keep using that word. But this is a brief blip in a very long history of relationships. I think we need to nurture it. We need to take some very concrete actions going forward to, if you will, take full advantage of the good relationships that have been built up over the last couple of months. I will cite one initiative that our international body, IFPMA, International Federation, has undertaken with the World Health Organization. If you're not familiar with this, it's called ACT, A-C-T, Accessing COVID-19 Tools. Accelerator initiative. And IFPMA, our industry is a founding partner with the WHO, which is almost unheard of. And it's all about affordability, accessibility, equitable access. And it's our industry committing to those principles going forward. So if we can stay true to those, not just internationally, globally, but here within Canada, I think that there's a good chance that we can reset the channel a little bit going forward. So I'm optimistic by nature, as I think Richard mentioned and others. So fingers crossed, and doing everything we can to make sure we take full advantage of these new relationships.
Well, that's excellent. I think that's the response that everyone here would hope for. So on that note, a big thanks to our panelists. I'll also mention we have a whack of questions that we weren't able to get to today. So with that in mind, we may just schedule another one of these sessions for very, very soon in the future. Big thanks to Wendy, to Robin, to Wayne, to Richard, and our lead panelist, Peter. I think there's just a couple of short housekeeping matters before we head off to the kitchen to microwave the SpaghettiOs or whatever happens to be on today. Quick exit poll before we leave. John, if you have that ready. No, I guess it's Kylie. Yeah, there we are. So as you know, there's a real-life component to this virtual meeting. It's the National Pharma Congress. As it stands, we're still scheduled for October, hoping that circumstances will allow us to bring that off. If you can just respond to the simple question, you coming or not coming? Give you another minute to make up your minds. Okay, I think that's probably representative. So as I would expect under these circumstances all over the map, and you know, we'll keep you posted as the date looms closer, and I imagine we're going to be doing probably another one of these virtual meetings just to fill in the space, assuming that the feedback is good. Delegates are going to get a feedback questionnaire separately as a post-meeting mail-out. Once again, I'd like to recognize our sponsors and our partners for this session: Peak Pharma Solutions, Impres Pharma, Ashfield Healthcare Canada. Thank you for picking up the bill on this. And thanks to our committed team at Chronicle Companies, in particular, John and Kylie. I invite everybody to stay in touch. We're likely to want to do this again, as I mentioned, but we are curious about your suggestions and thoughts. So you can send us an email at health@chronicle.org, or you can be in touch through our LinkedIn connection. That's tiny.cc NPC on LI. So tinycc/NPC on LI. And that's all we've got for this morning. So thanks very much for joining us. Stay healthy, and hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.